Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Hello, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Very good. Want to talk about gold today. Gold's been in the news. Gold has been rising in dollar prices, and there's more interest in it. And of course, I never believed what Bernanke told me. He says gold is not money. And to say that, he has to repeal 6,000 years of history, but he didn't quite understand that. Some think they're capable of doing that, repealing history, but you can't do it. So gold has fascinated me for a long time. It was the issue of the monetary value that was discussed in the 1960s, why people were predicting way back then that the Bretton Woods, which was a fake standard in gold, would not work. Henry Hazlitt, even when they set up the Bretton Woods in 1945, he says it's not going to work, and he was right. It took a while for people to realize that. But I've been interested in it. As a matter of fact, there was some motivation behind the monetary issue, for me to run for Congress, just for a chance to talk about it, because I felt that this is significant. Monetary policy is significant, and the longer I studied this, the more I realized, well, you can study currency and money and gold, but you gotta know what's going on at the Fed, because that's where the real distortion is. So the issue's been around a long time. And there's been times throughout history where currencies have been debased and ruined, and people would have maybe a relationship to gold, but it would break down when they would break the rules, and that is restrain themselves in printing and creating fiat money against the gold standard. And governments have been notorious for this all the way back to the Roman times, that the people who wanted to distort, and that's usually some type of a relationship with governments, because governments always want to be bigger than what is restrained by the marketplace, and restrained by taxation, and restrained by the people's interests. So this is the grand deception, and that is the inflation of the money supply to distort and to tax and to regulate. So this has been around a long time. And Chris, I just wonder if we have any idea how long this issue's existed. I think it's been a very long time.
It has, Dr. Paul. Gold, as you mentioned, we're talking 6,000 years here. And this is all over the world. Gold has been money, and it's not because of man-made laws. There isn't a decree that says in Russia, in China, in India, in the British colonies that gold is money for everyone. Such a law and decree does not exist. It was freely chosen by people in the marketplace voluntarily, because gold has all the key properties of money, which is the topic of another show, but it has it. So it was a long process to wean Americans off of believing that gold is money. And you could read about that process, a drawn-out process to get people to accept that government will print whatever money it was. And they had to convince Americans, and unfortunately they succeeded, into believing that gold was nothing more than the color of one of the Crayola crayons. And because they succeeded in brainwashing people, just look what they have done.
Right. And the temptation always is getting something for nothing, and that's what inflation is all about. Duplicating a currency unit and saying you're increasing wealth, which is absolutely false, and usually reduce the amount of wealth because it causes so many distortions. They increase the money supply because immediately it looks like, oh boy, the market is being stimulated, but it's equivalent to a counterfeiter coming to town and spending a lot of counterfeit money until people decide, hey, this isn't real money, this is just counterfeit, and then the whole bubble collapses. But that's been known. And it's awfully tempting, and governments like it, but governments always want to get control of the monetary system. We were no different than that, even though our founders warned us against it and said, no fiat money, no paper currency, only use gold and silver as legal tender. But it didn't take long for them to drift away from that. Certainly in the 20th century, that's what the whole 20th century was all about, and that was destroying the value of the dollar with the formation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913. So that was the introduction to the progressive era, big time spending, wars and welfare. And it's amazing that it lasted that long, because most people should be able to see through it. But the one thing about gold is a neutralizer. It brings the speculation down on high prices and trying to make a better world just by increasing the money supply. But the one thing that is missed on it is the fact that we know that when they print a lot of money and create a lot of units of currency, prices go up. But the real hooker here, because most of the time, or a lot of middle class poor people who are on welfare, they love it. Not only the military industrial complex, but average people like it because they see a stimulation. But one thing they don't realize, prices go up, more people might buy stuff for a while, but wages never keep up. And I think that's what we're suffering from today. The prices have gone up, and that is why to me, it's still astounding to see some people living on the street in California, and I am told that some have a job or 2 or 3 times jobs, but they can't rent because the rents are so high. And then they say, well, that's why we need socialism. No, I would say we have too much socialism and money, and that's where the distortion is. But that is the tragedy of it. The gold really protects the common person, the working man, protects his salary. But the notion that you can have an immediate benefit and benefit from some government spending program, that is the temptation that can't be resisted. It's been there a long time, and we've been living with it to a degree. We've had a lot of ups and downs over the years. We've had some corrections, but right now, gold is becoming a big deal. You know, for 10 years, between the year 2000 and 2010, you know, gold was going up rapidly. But then for another 10 years, you know, there was a period of 20 years where gold essentially did nothing. But that means that it doesn't, all the ramifications of increasing the money supply, you don't see it one day, they do one day, then the next day. It takes a long time for these temptations to print too much money to be discounted in the market. The other biggest crime, at least one of the biggest crimes I can think of, is the whole idea that with all this easy money and low interest rates is the amount of debt that's accumulated for everybody. I'm told that there's $1 trillion more debt by the consumer now than there was 10 years ago before the big bubble crashed, 10 years ago. So the debt is there, but what about the government debt? I mean, here we're at 22 trillion and a couple $100 trillion of financial obligations, and that is all a consequence of manipulation of the money supply. And this is something that is being unwound right now. We're facing the crisis. We're in the middle of it. And although you have periods of ups and downs, right now I think we're in a period of disintegration of the monetary system. And you can't measure it by saying, well, if the dollar's still doing pretty good, look at on the exchange market, it's still a strong currency. Of course, all the other ones are much weaker, but it's really not a strong currency if you look at what it's done to the average middle class citizen. If they can't keep up with paying their bills because there's so much inflation that nobody wants to admit to, at least the government won't admit to, then there's a problem there. But I think the warning signs are all around us. You know, we have a conservative-speaking Republican president, and even when we had a Republican Congress, spending never slowed up. Deficits didn't go down. And just look at the exploding deficit we have now, $1 trillion every year, and it's just moving rapidly. But I think the end points in some of these problems we have come, out of the dead of night, and they come suddenly. There's some event that causes people to panic. And when you see what's going on in the stock market, it is now being reflected in the monetary system and the gold. The gold price is important. Although we shouldn't talk about the gold price, we should talk about the ratio of gold to paper money, and that's a lot different because everything eventually is measured in terms of gold. Throughout history, it's always been measured by gold, although there always can be currency substitutes for a while, and on total chaos in a war or depression, people will use substitutes for it. But ultimately, it's the gold that indicates, what's really going on. And that's why governments want to manipulate the perceptions and manipulate the price of gold. They do that and they say, oh no, things are pretty good. Gold hasn't gone up again. And then they think that everything is okay. But believe me, they're kidding themselves. Right now, I think the kidding is over. I think it's out of the bag now and people know what's going on. And I think the dollar ratio to gold is going to be much higher. There's going to be a lot more dollars. There's going to be a lot more depreciation of the currency, which means in the conventional sense, the price of gold is rising quickly right now, but it's going to get a lot worse.
That's right, Dr. Paul. And I just wanted to point out, the Soviets really showed the world that socialism does not work. The entire planet noticed that this is not the way to go. And I think the United States has shown the world that no government should ever have this monopoly to print their own money. Because look what they've done. They've tried to and continue to try to militarily conquer the entire planet. Domestically, like you've just pointed out, there's half the country lives on some kind of federal assistance. They've racked up promises that they can't keep right now, and they're campaigning for even more outrageous promises of health care and college and whatever they can say to get votes. So other nations are definitely seeing this, and they notice, this ruins. Not only does it disrupt the world, but it ruins the country that prints this money. And I've seen other countries like these superpowers, this Russia and China, and it doesn't look like they want themselves to have this power because it ruins themselves too. So the United States, like the Soviets, has shown the world roads that you should never go down.
Very good. I want to go over a little bit of the ups and downs of gold, many of them which I've observed directly, but some will just be part of our U.S. history. Because, at the time of the Constitution, gold was essentially, the ratio was $20 to the ounce. And actually, it stayed that way for a long, long time. And that's where it was when the Constitution was written. And it stayed that way until 1913. It was still $20 an ounce. In 1913, of course, we had the Federal Reserve come in, and it didn't take them long to start working on dividing and separating this whole notion of gold restraining the printing presses. So between 1913 and 1933, it was still $20 an ounce. But we had FDR come in, and he said, no, what we need is more printing. We need to get this out of the Depression. We don't want to be restrained by gold. So his very first thing he did was take over the monetary system. Banks were closed, and gold was confiscated. And he quickly made gold $35 an ounce so he could print all the money he thought he needed. But then the $35 an ounce, that lasted for a pretty long time, all the way up until between 1933, even by 1971. After the Bretton Woods had been developed, it was still $35 an ounce. But eventually the market spoke, and it always does. And the market said, you printed way too much money. It's worth a lot more than $35 of paper money, and therefore the gold, when it had to be closed, we gave away hundreds of millions of ounces of gold at a bargain price, but it was because the dollar was worth a lot less. So between 1971 and even 1980, that's just 9 years, it went from $35 an ounce up to $800 an ounce. That's a 22-fold increase. But that was making up for past time, and there were predictions about this, and so the adjustment was made in the marketplace. But even after that, after the year 2000, after the year 1980, gold sort of settled down. They went too fast, and 800 was a little too much for the market to handle. So for 20 years, gold was really in the doldrums, and it was finding the ratio of the paper, the printing paper, they had printed it, the market is sorting this all out, and it was illegal for us to own. So it was a mixed bag. But between 1980 and the year 2000, it didn't do anything. Matter of fact, it went down significantly. In the year 2000, right at the time of the NASDAQ bubble and ushering in the first decade of the century, it was only $270. Now, if you were looking over the history, a bargain time to buy would have been at the beginning of the century at $270. But guess what happened? Between 2000 and 2011, just in 11 years, it went from $270 up to $1,800. That was a six-fold increase. That's huge too, 6 times higher. But the 1800, excuse me, the 1800 did not last either. That was a little bit too much too fast. So it backed off, and for the next 5 years it backed off. It went from 1800 down to over $1,000, $1,050, and that was in 2016. So that was an adjustment. It was less than 20 years, but it definitely went from down to get into a better ratio, or what the market was accepting. So it's down to $1,000, but that was in 2012, and then in 2012 at $1,000, the gold prices started going back up again. Between 2016 and today, it's up over $500. You know, that sounds significant, like, oh, well, somebody could have really protected themselves by doing that. But that's puny compared to what happened before for making up for lost time. 22 times larger, 6 times greater, and this is a half of a percent time. It's only up 50%. It didn't even double in these last 5 years. So the point is, there's a lot of money out there. We have QEs out there. We have the deficit. We have the spending, and we have a totally disruptive financial and monetary system around the world. We're in trade wars and currency wars, and it's only up $500 in these last 5 years, maybe 3 years or so, and which means to me that it's going up a lot more. If you compare it to 22 times or 6 times greater, and we're here at just a 50% increase, half of it, and I say we're way behind. So I think this is going to continue, because I do not think this is sustainable, and we hear today a lot about this is a big issue, and we have to have the newcomers tell us how to run the modern monetary theory. Well, that's just old theory. That just means print faster. So those are the kind that we are facing. So that is the reason that I am very much concerned, about the situation, the financial situation, because just as the history shows, it's not lasting. We've abused it. And we got a little reprieve when we re-legalized gold after all those years. Just think, from 1933 up until 1975, we weren't even allowed to own gold because the government wanted to destroy the indicator, destroy the messenger. The price of gold is the messenger that tells us there's a big problem. So we can always expect government to come in, but there's a limit to what they can do. They kept it at $35 an ounce all those years, but they were not powerful enough because they didn't have enough gold. So the market is more powerful. I say the market is taking over again, and you're going to see some significant changes here to come in the next few years.
I agree, Dr. Paul, and I'll finish up by saying, urging our viewers and listeners, don't fall for the great leader complex. We don't need government to decree henceforth only gold will be used in trade or whatever. No, that's not the role of government to tell us what money is. The only thing we need from them is to remove all the barriers of competition, get rid of all the legal tender laws. If people want to use dollars, knock yourself out. A lot of people, just out of habit, will continue to use dollars. But all barriers to competition, all legal tender laws, we shouldn't be forced to use dollars only. We should be able to choose what we want. And if people choose gold, they may choose other commodities like silver. Who knows what the market will choose? But that's the long-term goal. And Dr. Paul, I know you may have some dollar predictions that our fans may like in the meantime for the gold price. What do you say about that?
Well, I've bought gold for a long time, and I bought gold in the early 70s when Bretton Woods broke down. At that time, it was illegal for us to own gold, but if you had numismatic gold, that was permissible. And so Mexico was minting a coin at that time, and they put an old date on it, and it was claimed, well, that's a numismatic coin. So those were the first coins that I bought. But I never really invested in gold. I wasn't saying, and I didn't trade in gold. I used it as a savings account. I used it that as a reserve, always thinking this is my backup. And I did that systematically over the years. So I bought gold over the years, but I haven't sold gold because I always figured that the dollar is going to continue to go down, which I believe is the case. I don't say the price or the purchasing power of gold is going to go up, but the value of the dollar is going to go down, so the ratio obviously changes. So that was way back in 71, but I wouldn't. I think of it more as insurance. Because, let's say, I mentioned a period of time of 20 years, after the gold hit 800, and it took 20 years. So if you're in the investment business, say gold is good, buy gold, buy it at 800, you really wouldn't have been well protected, for a long time. So that's the reality. And also that's the reason I personally don't get involved with hedging and doing this. People who are a lot more attuned to that and have more experience, but a lot of people lose money in it. But I do it because I believe the dollar will be printed, the debt will continue, the price in dollar terms, the dollar's going down in value, so there'll be more dollar ratio to gold. And I think that definitely will continue, but I don't. I see it as more insurance policy, and for me, it's paid off because I have been in better condition to back up any emergencies. But everybody likes to know, and I get asked frequently, well, when is it going to even go a lot higher? You say it's already started up, even though it's mediocre, only $500 in the last few years, which is significant, but not compared to a 22 times increase or a 6 times increase. I think there's a lot of room. So I'm going to make a modest prediction. And in Austrian economics, there's one rule. Don't be precise predictors and say this is going to happen next year. So the rule is don't pretend you know what's going to happen because you don't, but you know that it's going to go in a certain direction. I predict that this ratio, the dollar to gold, will continue to deteriorate, that you're going to need more paper money for the gold. That is something I think is safe to say. But the truth is we don't know whether the real calamity will be in 6 months or 6 years. And at the rate we're going, if we continue to do this, that's what it'll turn out to be in a calamity. So I'm going to make a modest prediction. I'm going to say that it's going to be threefold greater than it was when it started off, just in 2016. And at the end of next year, I claim and predict, with those reservations I made, that gold will be $3,000 an ounce. Now that sounds like a whole lot, but if you look back at what's happened, it's pretty cautious, especially since it's been up $500 already. So, but I predict that from the beginning, when in 16 it was $1,050, and that by the end of next year it's going to be $3,000, which means that it went up threefold. 3 times 1,000. So that's a prediction for what it's worth. I don't think I'd advise people to get into the futures market and do it because you can't be sure. But one thing that I thought was important over the years, that since I can't judge, and most people, if they're honest, they can't judge, should I buy the money, should I buy my gold today or tomorrow or next year, should I buy silver? No, I think if you have savings, if you want to save something, you're going to put it in a CD. But I think what's going to happen, people are going to rush out of all these zero interest rate bonds, and it's going to be trillions of dollars, and they're going to want to buy stuff. So prices are going to go up all over, and of course that means the price of gold will go up. You know, and it's conceivable that I may be way under my prediction, because if the big crisis hit, it will go a lot more eventually. But I'm just saying, I'm going to cautiously predict by the end of the next year, gold will be $3,000 an ounce. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.